much of the oil available on the market was Russian, because Europeans were essentially buying up the Middle East oil, which was our traditional supply. So circumstances pushed us in a certain direction. But since you spoke about moral ambiguity, I would say this, no European country has been attacked with Indian weapons. I wish I could say that for European weapons vis-a-vis India. So keep that in mind.
Be more explicit so that people understand what you're saying.
Europeans sell weapons which are used to attack India. Not now, for many, many years. We Indians have never done anything to endanger Europe.
Okay. I must admit, I can't remember the precise title of this panel, but it's World Affairs. Let's call it that. And for World Affairs, we have a fantastic panel to discuss it all. Straight from one of the world's, unfortunately, one of the world's hotspots, we have Lina Naseba, Minister of State for the UAE. We have Subramanian Jaishankar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for India, one of the kind of most respected voices on the diplomatic planet, and Minna Valtonen, the Finnish Foreign Affairs Minister. So thank you all very much indeed. Mr. Jaishankar, if I could start with you. I think India's position, everybody's obviously, you're one of the world's big powers, so what you do matters. And in Europe, people have been a bit equivocal about India's position on the Russia-Ukraine war. Why aren't you more committed to the Ukraine fight? Now you have another big war close at hand in Iran and so on. Explain to the audience here, you're sitting in Delhi, how do you see the challenges posed by those two conflicts and India's national interests and how you're trying to steer them?
Mostly countries are committed to wars they fight and are equivocal about ones which they observe, as a general proposition.
Yeah.
So I can think of a lot of wars close to us where the rest of the world is quite equivocal. In this particular case, here's the challenge. You have, for the sake of simplicity, 4 parties, which is US, Israel, Iran. I'm using the Gulf as a part, though I accept they have a very differentiated position. And we have extremely good, extremely strong relations with all of them. So when you have then that situation, clearly your response...
So to clarify, that includes Iran. You regard yourself as having good, strong relations with Iran?
Yes, we have good relations, very substantial relations with Iran.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying the same. I'm not saying the 4 relationships are of the same quality. I mean, for example, clearly where the Gulf is concerned, we have 10 million Indians living in the Gulf. The largest number of Indian nationals who live outside India are actually in the UAE.
Right.
The Gulf countries are our primary energy suppliers. Many of them would be among our top 10 trading partners. I mean, if I use UAE as an example, you have a big community, huge trade, significant energy relationship, and in fact, much more than that, close defense and security relationship as well. So the challenge is in a quadrilateral situation where you have equities, arguably of a different order in each account. How do you manage them while addressing this conflict?
Yeah.
And are
you feeling the domestic consequences of the war already? Because I think India's been unusually vocal in saying, look, you know, the rising energy prices are driving people into poverty.
Yes, because, you know, when you are a low income or a low middle income country, then as indeed happened after the Ukraine war as well, an increase in energy prices hits a low income country much more than it does a middle income or a high income country.
And are you just stuck in the role of kind of frustrated observer, or is there much you can do to try to help?
Well, I think at this time, much of the world is stuck in the position of a frustrated observer. But a lot of countries are trying to do what they can in this situation. Yeah. So it's not for want of trying. I mean, I'm talking about us alone, but I think, certainly there are not that many countries who would have relations, decent relations with all the parties involved. So clearly we've sort of reasoned with the countries, we've been in touch with them. We hope very much that, you know, the US-Iran negotiation leads to an early outcome. Yeah. And the continuation of the fighting is creating problems.
Yeah, and we're in Finland, so I have to obviously ask you about the Russia-Ukraine war. I think in Europe there was a feeling that India adopted what we would regard as a kind of moral equivalence between the two sides, that you were saying, well, it's a big shame, but, you know, maybe they should stop, but you were too sympathetic towards Russia, too willing to buy oil from Russia. So how would you explain that position to the people here?
Well, I'd make two observations. I buy oil. I buy oil based on cost and availability. So at that point of time, much of the oil available on the market was Russian, because Europeans were essentially buying up the Middle East oil, which was our traditional supply. So circumstances pushed us in a certain direction. But since you spoke about moral ambiguity, I would say this, you know, no European country has been attacked with Indian weapons. I wish I could say that for European weapons vis-a-vis India. So keep that in mind.
Be more explicit so that people understand what you're saying.
Europeans sell weapons which are used to attack India. Not now, for many, many years. We Indians have never done anything to endanger Europe. So I think that's a reasonable point.
Okay. Minister Naseba, I mean, you are right, you know, in the front line. And we were all hoping for a peace settlement, but it looks like the war's flared up again. How do things seem viewed from the UAE? You know, in the earlier panel, they're saying this war's going on for a while.
Thank you for the question. Thank you to the host for having us. It's been a really quiet time in my part of the world, as you've observed.
That's why you came here.
That's why I came here. I had not much to do, and this looked like an interesting way to debate some of the policy decisions we make often at such a rapid pace. I think that's one of the fundamental changes in how we make our decisions today that has had impact. The pace of which we gather information, that we look at disinformation, and we make policy decisions has had a very enormous impact on being able to debate those outcomes in a measured way. I'd really like to also thank both of you because you're doing a lot of my work for me today. The Ambassadors Forum, the UAE Ambassadors Forum is meeting in Abu Dhabi today, and they asked me to address it from my hotel room in Helsinki last night. I said I have far better practitioners sitting on the panel here today, so you are being webcast into the UAE Global Ambassadors Forum, so thank you for doing that as well. But it is a critical time that our ambassadors are meeting, and they are hearing a number of our leaders address them about some of the key takeaways that the last 100 days have shown us as a country, as we have faced, if you imagine Helsinki or New Delhi, facing over 3,000 drones and missiles in the space of 100 days, in a country that has been geared towards relative peace and prosperity for quite a number of decades. I think you can imagine the enormity of the shock that we've had to absorb in being able to adapt to that and to be resilient in those circumstances. So the first takeaway has been that the investment we have made in being resilient as a society, as an economy, but also in terms of our military capacity has paid off. That has really paid off, and that has been over a decade in the making. I think you've seen that we've responded to over 90% of those attacks successfully. And I see many of my colleagues, but also from the UN in New York, but also many ambassadors who have lived through that in the UAE, who have felt that the UAE protected them as if they were, like the Indian community, home. I think that's the other key takeaway about the UAE lesson and the model, is that it has been a one society response to this crisis. And it strikes me as I sit in Finland, that has a very long border with a dominating regional hegemon, that there are more similarities in our region and in Europe today that have come to the fore in the last 2-3 years than perhaps we first realize when we look at each other across the waters, or when we take flights to each other's countries and when we visit each other's museums. There are a lot more similarities in the way the international system functions or misfunctions. And I think that's my second takeaway. And I heard this a lot in the very good opening remarks today from President Stubb and from President Ruto, that ultimately we're all in this room vested in this international system. It matters to us. What is playing out, or what has played out in Ukraine, and I remember that India and the UAE were actually on the Security Council when that disruption or that rupture or that disorder happened in 2022. We were on the Security Council together, looking at how the international system would respond. We were also facing similar disruptions in the Middle East, in Africa, with each continent, to a degree, saying, this is not my war. And I think that is the takeaway theme for me about the failures of policymaking and leadership, in fact, that has led to this trust deficit. It was only recently that we heard a European leader talk about the Iran war as not our war. And therefore, it shouldn't be surprising to a degree when the Ukraine war is not seen as our war in the African continent or the Middle East, and when other horrific conflicts that are raging in Africa are not seen as our war across the ocean. And I think that fundamentally is what has to change. That is fundamentally what has to change. It's another takeaway from this period. Because what is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz today, a waterway that, again, earlier, the president of Kenya said wasn't even on his radar, which I think is true for many people in this audience. What is playing out in the Strait of Hormuz today is fundamentally a test of this international system. It is a test of freedom of navigation. It is a test of the concept of trade as a global public good. It threatens, as Dr. Jaishankar has said, a fifth of the world's energy supply. The UN has estimated upward of 45 million facing famine as a result. It's a third of the world's fertilizer supply. Many countries have not been able to lay down harvest for food, so food security is at jeopardy. It's $500 billion of container traffic. This is global trade being tested in a narrow strait that is 40 kilometers from us. Iran is a neighbor of 40 kilometers from us at our closest points. And I think how this plays out will have implications for other straits, and this has been said by many of the practitioners in this room. But it will fundamentally have implications for how we respond as an international system. For us, it's partnerships, and it's partnerships that President Ruto said are defined as partnerships, not necessarily alliances, and I think Dr. Jaishankar said that. Yeah. It's resilience, it's alternative routes, and it's the international system.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about resilience and you sound admirably calm for somebody, you know, in the middle of a war zone. But one of the things that people have also said is that the UAE in particular, it's had this golden era, incredibly high international profile, Dubai, the safest city in the world, money, you know, coming in, and that you do have resilience and you could survive it for a while. But the longer the war goes on, the more the threat to your model, to you know, for such an international city. So how much longer can you kind of cope with a situation like this without it taking a real toll on the UAE?
Thank you for the question, and I think it's a fair one. And I would say that is actually the answer to the question many of us, why did the UAE face over 60% of the strikes in the region, having not been responsible or part of the initial US-Israeli operations that began the spate of the conflict. And I think the answer to that is exactly what you've just said, Gideon. It's the model. The model represents an alternative for the region and globally that is, as you said, calm, that is ambitious, that is creative. Much like Finland, it's entrepreneurial with what it has, with the size of its population, with its income and its resources. We're not quite the number 10 years in a row happiest country on earth yet, but we've tried, we've strived to be a country that has focused on innovation, that has focused on prosperity, that has focused on healthcare, on AI, on investment, on infrastructure, and trade. And I think that model is what is under threat today, which is why in our defense, much as Ukraine has defined its defense as existential, I think the UAE sees the defense of this model, not of our country. We've been able to do that quite calmly, and I think we'll continue. We've actually demonstrated incredible capacity that was perhaps not taken into account before. But I think the UAE has demonstrated also that it has vision. And ultimately, capital flows to places not only that demonstrate resilience, but that show an alternative vision to the dysfunction that we're seeing from many leaders and systems around the world today. So countries want to see a country that has good governance, good laws, and ability to defend itself. Capital today is not risking environments that are completely safe because they don't exist. They don't exist. So showing the resilience actually has made us a better bet, and I think showing the vision has made us a better bet, and that's what we're doubling down on. Again, if I can just answer another question that you've posed in that. We're also looking at our strategic autonomy in very serious ways and in an accelerated way. So by the end of 2027, the Strait of Hormuz for us will not necessarily be a route we need. Today we're already getting 70%, over 70% of our product out to market. By the end of 2027, in terms of energy export, it will be at 100% through other pipelines. So what is at stake at the Strait of Hormuz is not necessarily for a country that's already over 70% non-oil GDP. It's not necessarily what is going to define our future economy, but it is going to define what happens in the global economy, including, as I come back to it, the issue of famine and food security, which is why I will say to the audience here, I think what happens in the Strait of Hormuz is your problem. I think what happens in the European continent is our problem. And I think the role that countries like India and the UAE play in trying to bridge the realities of great power conversations is part of our problem as well, and the role that we can play.
Okay. Alina Valtonen, you know, you're sitting right next door to Russia, to Ukraine. Do you really have, to use the modish term, the bandwidth to engage with another conflict with the Iran war, or is it really, if you're sitting in this part of the world, all about Russia and Ukraine?
Well, of course, you have to concentrate on everything that's going on in the world, and plus everything is interlinked too. First, I would like to start, though, with referring to what Dr. Jaishankar said earlier on buying oil from Russia. Let us remind ourselves that Europe in itself, or when we introduced as the West the oil price cap, the idea was not to prohibit the world from buying Russian oil, right? So in India's defense, and I do understand that India is buying Russian oil, at least mostly within the oil price cap, that's basically the intention of the entire system, because when that was introduced, the entire idea was not to disrupt the entire oil market, but essentially to make sure that, yes, oil is supplied also from Russia, but Russia is not just making a massive margin out of it. Mm-hmm. So in that in that sense, it is and has been working, even though the Iran war now, of course, has a little bit disrupted the entire idea to the extent that, for instance, the US has put some of the sanctions out of place, at least for the time being. But that about that. But of course, Russia's war against Ukraine is an existential question to Europe. And I would say more to the world as well than perhaps countries tend to think. And I do also subscribe to the idea what also Lena said earlier, that we can't afford the thinking that this is not our war. I think it's fair to say in the context that, yes, it is not NATO's war, because NATO did not attack Iran, right? But to the extent that nobody wants to see a nuclear Iran, and nobody wants to see, for instance, the Iranian authorities killing their own citizens on the streets, then definitely it's a global issue and something we need to take care of, like is the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, Finland is has committed itself to the French and UK initiative to essentially making sure that traffic happens once the hostilities are over. And now we're just waiting for the deal.
Yeah. We may be waiting some time. But talking about, though, the war next door, Russia-Ukraine, it seems to me there's been a real shift in mood in the last couple of months, that if you'd had this conversation a year ago, it would have been very pessimistic about Ukraine's chances. 6 months ago, people were saying, or I was in Ukraine in February, and it was, they felt, okay, we survived the winter, but this feels endless, and we're going to be back here in another year's time, and it's taking a big toll on us. But these deep strikes by the Ukrainians into Russia, plus signs of kind of grumbling openly within the Russian elite that the war's not going well, do you feel we're kind of at a turning point?
I think so, and I certainly hope so. I don't think there's an end to this war unless Ukraine, in some shape or form, wins. Because otherwise,
That's
Russia...
an interesting point, but in what, because sometimes, some of the Americans would say to me, I mean, even the Americans who are backing is that Ukraine's not going to win. I mean, like, Moscow's not going to fall. There's got to be a settlement.
Yeah. Well, I do think that Ukraine is going to win, and most certainly the Ukrainian people deserve that. They have been now defending their country against a full-scale invasion for almost 5 years or 4.5 years.
Sorry to keep interrupting, but define win. What do you mean by win?
Well, I think what is winning is preserving sovereignty, preserving freedom, preserving a European secure perspective for the people. Mm-hmm. And I should say as well that preserving your territory, because, I mean, that is your legal, entitlement based on the UN Charter. And that is also not impossible. Nothing is impossible. And if we look at the picture, like you, Gideon, pointed out, I mean, things are completely different, well, not completely different, but so much better now than 3 to 4 months ago. Not to the extent that, yes, Ukraine still has to defend themselves at a very heavy cost, of course, like happens in a war, and also while Russia is targeting deliberately civilians and civilian infrastructure. That's for one. But the thing is that Ukraine has been able to not only hold the line on the battlefield, they came through another harsh winter, but what is, I would say, the main difference now is that they have been able to challenge Russia throughout their vast territory, because what used to be, or what always historically has been Russia's main asset is that they have this massive landmass. So basically, you could count so many armies that have fallen on their way to Moscow, right? But now, Ukraine can challenge Moscow. And it's a completely different scenario from whatever Russian leader has been forced to take into account in the past. They can't protect their elites anymore in that sense. And also, of course, their economy is more or less in shambles. So it's a totally different picture for them now than it was 3 to 4 months ago. And what I hear from the Ukrainians, their capabilities are only getting better, not only talking about drones, but also long strike capabilities using missiles.
Thanks. Dr. Jaishankar, I'd like to give you a chance to comment on lots of interesting things that have just been said, but also maybe chuck in an extra element, which is Donald Trump, who's any discussion of world affairs comes back to him. How much, have you been surprised by the direction of his second term? A lot of people, when he was re-elected, said, okay, we kind of know what he's like. We've seen him in office before, but is this a different Trump that we're dealing with the second time around?
I'll take the easier one first.
Yeah.
The thoughts which are going on. Let me pick up on two things which Lana said. I think the truth is, to a great deal, everybody has that sense of it's not my war. don't admit it at times. But it's very natural, because at the end of the day, the more stakes you have, the closer it is to you, the more vested you are. It's your war. And for somebody else, the further away they are, it's not their war. I think there needs to be a degree of understanding of that. And the expectation that, my war, as I said, I've had this statement thrown back at me repeatedly, so I don't repeat, I don't want to dwell on it too far, but I think the expectation that in the sense Ukraine, because it is so strong in Europe's calculus, is therefore shared by the rest of the world to the same degree, is no more reasonable than the rest of the world. Each region would have its own priorities. So again, because we keep coming back to Russian oil, look, when we didn't buy significant amount of Russian oil till 2022. Circumstances compelled us to get into that market. And I must say, the Russians have been steady suppliers because they put the cargoes out there, and you go out there and buy oil, whichever is the most reasonable and available oil. But I do want people to remember this. At that time, the US specifically asked India to buy Russian oil to stabilize the world markets. Yeah. Okay? Right now, if you see, after having first put tariffs on us last year for buying Russian oil, the US then again lifted its sanctions
because
on Russian oil.
They need the oil price down again. Yeah.
So let's not pretend that there is some great principle involved here. I mean, if it is on, off, and do it when it suits us and don't do it when it doesn't suit us. I mean, come on, we are all the adults in the room. We know what the game is. So I don't think making this about sanctimony is really warranted. Okay?
Well, if you don't like sanctimony, then Donald Trump's your guy. He's very frank about. But
wait, hang on. I have one other point.
Yeah, please.
And that's the resilience point. Because you asked me saying, what are you doing other than, what can you do other than being a frustrated observer? No, I think, look, there are immediate responses, there are short-term, medium-term responses. What, for example, we heard from Lana is, UAE, for example, is de-risking by trying to build alternative evacuation routes for its energy. So what we're going to see to some degree is the Gulf itself de-risk the Gulf. Okay? To some extent, the rest of the world will work with the region also to build redundancy, and the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is envisaged as one such initiative. But the third one, which is really interesting, I cite my own country as an example. Today, our largest oil supplier, little less than 40%, is Russia. Our largest gas supplier is the United States. And that was not the case till the 28th of February of this year. The main supplier was Qatar.
Sure.
So what is happening is the world is also de-risking on the region. People are looking for alternative energy sources and saying, okay, I'm prepared to buy at longer distance, maybe at a higher cost, but there is a greater security about it, predictability about it. So what I see in a way is that the global energy scenario will fundamentally change after this. Now, I'm not unidimensional. I'm not saying, for example, in India's case, our relationship with the Gulf is only about oil. As I said, we have many other factors, including people, talent, skills, business, security. But definitely, the way the energy flows were on the 27th of February before this war started, it's going to be significantly different, possibly irreversibly different, once this phase is over. So in an interesting way, just like the Ukraine conflict changed the energy flows for this region, what the Iran conflict is going to do is probably change the energy flows for Asia, certainly, possibly for much of the world. Your question
Yes.
on Trump, I was coming to that. Look, it is natural that people would extrapolate from one term to another. But it is also a fact that the second term, the politics of the second term was significantly different. And I think the politics of that and how America itself and American, sort of institutions and systems have reacted to that has been extrapolated onto the rest of the world. In a sense, the answer is a kind of a yes and a kind of a no. I think what the first term and the run-up to the election had shown us was that there would be a very high degree of change. Okay, and you have to kind of acknowledge it, that much of what happened was actually declared in advance. Tariffs, for example. It's just that a world accustomed to its habits did not actually think this would be carried out. This is rhetoric, but it won't become policy, or policy would not become practice. In that sense, I would say all of us were braced for a term where there would be very significant departures from the past, even from his first term. But I think probably most of us, I really can't think of anybody who was not, did not probably expect it to be as radical as it turned out to be. Now, some countries and some situations have felt it less. I mean, in our case, for example, we are not an alliance partner, so it didn't impact our security the way it would do to a NATO country or a bilateral treaty partner. There would be, countries who in other areas were all affected, like in tariffs. There would be some countries who were more affected on, say, immigration. So pick the issue and you would get, the world was unevenly impacted. But absolutely, I think all said and done, the world really did not see the intensity of that departure from previous policies in the second term.
Yeah, and Minister Nusseibeh, I guess, Donald Trump, as we're just hearing, he's surprised us in many ways, continues to surprise us. And I think one of many states in your region, even if they were suspicious of Iran, were surprised by the US-Israeli attack and not particularly pleased that they weren't consulted in advance. But now the war's going on. I mean, we were hearing earlier that it's a mistake to say the Gulf, everyone's reacting the same way. People have different views. And the UAE, rightly or wrongly, you tell us, is regarded as the most hawkish of the Gulf states, as the one that says, okay, this war's started, now we've got to kind of finish the job. And people are very intrigued by the closeness of your relationship with Israel. So tell us about it.
I think, different countries had different risk appetites in the response to what was an unprovoked Iranian aggression on a number of Gulf countries, but also Jordan, after the beginning of US-Israeli operations. And you're right, we were surprised. And you are also right that we were doing a lot prior to February 28th to try to make sure such an escalation didn't happen. I myself was in Tehran 3 weeks prior to the 28th of Feb, meeting with the foreign minister and other senior officials in the foreign ministry to talk about the last decade of our foreign policy, which was really trending towards economic incentives for Iran's integration into the region. In the same way that we had also, I think, in a step change for regional policy in 2020, joined the Abraham Accords, reverting decades of a stalemated Arab position and trying to also incentivize Israel. Not only for a different economic integration into the region and a bilateral partnership with us and the other Abraham Accord countries, but also to understand that the full comprehensive peace dividend could also be achieved through the two-state solution for the Palestinian people also and self-determination. So trying to change the script in that way. I think the jury's still out on both of those initiatives. Obviously, Iran's unprovoked attacks on us and other GCC countries has, as Dr. Jaishankar said, galvanized the regions in ways that some of which we've absorbed and some of which we cannot possibly absorb until we're through, I think, this very inflamed period. But there have been some lessons. I think one of them is that obviously, while we trend towards de-escalation, exercising our full rights under Article 51 of the UN Charter in self-defense actually created a deterrence that was needed and has been established. Two, that we continue to play the role of trying to see a pathway through for regional integration of all the countries in the region. I think Dr. Jaishankar's point on diversification of global energy supply, but also corridors for everything from tech to AI to container traffic, whether it's IMEC or I2U2, will pay the peace dividend also of the other relationships, including that with Israel, because we are being given no other alternative. Three, the partnerships with countries are going to be based not necessarily on language or shared history or regional proximity, but on shared vision. And I think this is something that has really come to the fore of UAE foreign policy. So it's been a decade, if we talk about global energy transition, where we have been focused on global energy transition to clean energy in any case, in spite of, without knowing that this war was coming. And we are doubling down on that. It has been a decade where we have been massively invested in AI. We'll be building the biggest AI data center in the UAE outside of the United States in partnership with US tech. That's been a long-term perspective. With India, I remember, and I've seen the dinner table many times, where His Highness Sheikh Abdullah and Dr. Jaishankar decided not only would we sign a free trade agreement with each other, but that we would negotiate and conclude it within 88 days, India and the UAE. And it may seem like an agreement that was negotiated and concluded in 88 days can't have had that much impact, but actually the estimated trade figures and targets of 100 billion in trade has already been exceeded. We've set a new ambitious target of 200 billion by 2032. So I think we're showing that it's not necessarily the regional groupings of the past that determine the outcomes of our future, but it's the shared vision. Yes, we've responded. Sorry, Gideon, go ahead.
Please.
No, so yes, we've responded in a way that I think has asserted a necessary defense, but don't forget we were also under severe attack. But at the same time, we've maintained that the vision that we offer in our country, in our region, the 200 nationalities living there, although we are a small population ourselves, the investments we've made in tech and AI, in diversification, in clean energy, and in education are the right trajectory for the region, not the one that Iran and other countries have pursued that have trended towards funding of state proxies in other countries, in other Arab centers, or a ballistic missile weapons program that seems to have been designed to be aimed at regional partners, not at threats further away. And I think that's a fundamental conversation that we have to have with Iran. We hope for a peaceful resolution to this further inflammation, but we hope for one that also deals with some of the fundamental questions. And I think that's what we're now pushing forward today in the de-escalation.
I'm going to do something rather unfair, which is ask you a massive question and give you 2 minutes to answer.
Absolutely.
Because I should also go to the floor. But I was just thinking, as you were talking, that we heard from Minister Valtonen, very unequivocal, Ukraine's got to win, Russia's got to lose. How do you see this war ending? Would you say Iran has to lose, or there has to be some kind of new understanding? How does it end?
I'd like to see the 93 million people of Iran who have a shared history with us, close borders, incredible resources, education, and aspiration, achieve a better future for themselves. I'd like to see the people of the UAE flourish and be able to execute their vision of hope and optimism. And I'd like that to be a model that with countries like India and other countries in the region, we build out towards, as opposed to one of conflict and war. I think that's a fundamental human yearning. We've seen it over centuries, that while we have fallen into conflict, we've always trended towards systems and laws that prevent those conflicts. And I think...
But can we get to that lovely endpoint by non-military means, or without violence? I mean, they're not going to agree to that, the regime. They're not going to step aside.
You were talking about the current negotiations.
Yeah.
I think the jury's out on how the negotiations are going. I won't speak for how U.S. officials are seeing it. I think there are some in Iran who are moving towards a negotiating posture. Obviously, there are fundamental issues that they're discussing. I think much like Gaza and the UN Security Council Resolution 2803 that established the Board of Peace and an end to that conflict and the building out of hopefully a roadblock towards eventually a Palestinian entity that takes over Gaza and the West Bank. I think much in the same way, you can't fix it all at once. You have to build out the building blocks. So if the first step is looking at the nuclear program, then looking at ballistic missiles, looking at neighbors and regional security comes later. But you need to begin with something, and I think that's what the negotiations are trying to do.
I've got loads more questions for you, but I'll restrain myself because I want to give the audience a chance. There's a gentleman there.
Thank you very much. My name is Mikko Savola, member of the Parliament and Vice Chairman of the Defence Committee. Thank you for the very interesting debate. My question is about the defence industry. In Finland, we have very good companies such as Nokia, ICEYE, Patria contributing to communication, space technology and the defence manufacturing. And Finland is as well rapidly expanding its defence industry as almost all the countries in Europe and the world at the moment. So we have very strong knowledge, very important capabilities on the global as well. But my question is to you, can the global defence industry keep pace with rising security demands? And how do you see can countries like Finland, UAE and India strengthen defence industrial cooperation in an increasingly competitive world? Thank you.
Minister Jaishankar, do you want to take that first? Your compatriot Samir was saying India's buying European these days. So.
Okay. Well, actually, we happened, Minister Valtonen and I, to be discussing that very issue before we came to this meeting.
We signed many deals.
We're not supposed to say that.
I think the price just went up.
Look, here's really what's happening in the defense landscape. If you look at the Gulf conflict, if you look at Ukraine, go all the way back, probably to Nagorno-Karabakh, wars have become different. Conflicts have become different. That doesn't mean that the old stuff is completely irrelevant, but it means that the new ways, the drones, the missiles, the loiter munitions work more effectively and are used more prolifically. So you're going to have, which happens in many other walks of life, you're going to have the old coexisting with the new and some kind of creative mix of how to use them, depending on the situation. In India's case particularly, because I want to place this in the context of what else is happening in Europe. We signed this year a free trade agreement with Europe. That got a lot of news. What probably didn't get that much focus was we also concluded a security and defense partnership with Europe. We also have a talent mobility agreement, a framework with Europe. So what I can see is that the defense industries, particularly in the smarter sectors, will try to find common ground and see if there are partnerships there that will work. Side by side with that, there would be, the orthodox defense weaponry as well, the aircraft or the artillery or, whatever. So yes, I see this as a interesting possibility. We are right now negotiating a security of information agreement with the European Union. If we do that, I think that allows Indian companies to be eligible for contracts in Europe, which many of our companies would have an interest.
Okay. So I promise we'll finish on the dot in 5 minutes' time. So let me just take a couple more. One question here, and then the chap there.
Thank you so much for interesting conversation. My name is Minja Koskela and I'm the chair of Left Alliance. In the earlier panel discussion, there was a discussion about multipolarity, which was explained so that there are multiple small conflicts in many points and many parts of the world. And my fear is that whether these conflicts are big or small, they will lead to enhancing protectionism instead of international cooperation and multilateralism. And to some extent, I believe that that has already happened. So my question would be to you, through which institution and with what kind of practices we could ensure that we would lean towards each other and preserve multilateralism instead of enhancing protectionism?
Okay, and then chapter.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I'm Robert Sundman, I'm a Finnish journalist. My question is for Minister Nusseibeh. How different does the Gulf region look politically after the war? I mean, UAE is leaving OPEC. We have heard more critical comments towards the GCC. How do you see the future of cooperation in the region? What is the new strategy of UAE?
Okay, why don't you start with that, and then maybe Minister Jaishankar can take multilateralism.
I think what's been described today is the evolving asymmetric nature of the warfare we're seeing in many of the zones around us, and how we've absorbed those lessons and taken from them, I think, is defining the change as we go. It's difficult to give a direct answer because we are still in process of analyzing and thinking through our response to it. But the asymmetry means that a relatively inexpensive drone can cause shipping companies and insurance companies around the world with much bigger heft and weight to decide they just don't want to take that risk of moving container traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And the facts of the defense industry is relatively expensive by comparison. Patriot defense or THAAD missiles are an expensive way to deal with that kind of asymmetrical warfare. We've learned a lot from the Ukraine context in that, and there have been a lot of interchanges, sadly, not about innovation and AI and development and lifting more people out of poverty, but about how to improve our military-to-military cooperation. But I think that's a fundamental fact of how this development occurs in the coming period, which is we need to reestablish deterrence. But then we need to get behind something, and I think that's really the answer to your question of how do we see an evolving Gulf politically and how we think about multilateralism. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What the last several decades have shown us is that human history has taken us to a point where, whether it's with the World Bank, the IMF, the financial institutions, the United Nations, the Security Council, with all the reform that is required, we need to do the same business of multilateralism, but we need to do it better. We need to deliver an outcome. And I think that's the same for the Gulf. Partnerships need to deliver an outcome. They need to deliver an outcome first and foremost to their own people. We are responsible to our own populations. But we have, in this global community, also a responsibility to each other. And I think that's a changing nature, again, of UAE foreign policy. We will look for diverse partnerships with other countries that have that shared vision. But we will also look, as we have done, to reinforcing the international system. I don't think it's a bug, but a feature that over 135 countries condemned the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and also condemned in the GA Russia's attack on Ukraine. I think that's a fact because international law still becomes something that we all fall back to. It is a good system. We need to reinforce it. At the same time, minilaterals, smaller groupings, IMEX, I2U2s, Pax Silicas, the BRICS that Dr. Jaishankar chairs right now, other communal groupings of countries that can be more agile, the EU and the 27-nation bloc, could be ways in which we cooperate more agilely in the future as well.
Dr. Jaishankar, last word on that?
I chaired the Quad also while I was about.
Yeah. It's quite a feat to do the BRICS and the Quad together.
No question, multilateralism is under stress. And the needle has moved more towards, call it what you will, unilateralism, protectionism, etc., etc. But we need to kind of distinguish between the baby and the bathwater here. I don't think because multilateralism is not working effectively, we should junk it. It still is the best game in town. It needs to be improved. It doesn't need to be discarded. And in fact, a point which Lana made just now, which is on an issue like the freedom, the maintaining an international waterway, multilateralism has a power. It does matter how many countries finally support it or sign up to it. This is part of a bigger problem, and that is a problem of a world in transition. The debate is, you can't, have a insulated debate about multilateralism and globalization versus unilateralism and protectionism without understanding that all of this is happening because some parts of the world are stuck to where they were 80 years ago, and other parts of the world have moved, and there is a tension out here, and there's a politics out here which is reflective of that tension. So we would all want a reasonable solution, part of which is, of course, the reform of the UN, but a lot of it is also going to be the politics of many countries and how it plays out in those countries, how this rebalancing of the world order would happen, because we've had an economic rebalancing. We are now seeing a political rebalancing, to some extent a cultural rebalancing. So it is going to be a fairly messy situation for a predictable future.
Okay, I know you've got to go. Do you want to have a last word, Minister Valtonen, or have you got to rush?
No, well, thank you. Not much to add, but a couple of points. First of all, Finland is running for the UN Security Council 29-30, so please keep that in mind, and thank you for...
Me too.
Exactly,
We're supporting both of you.
28, 29.
Exactly. So we will be cooperating there as well. And I think, well, this has been a fantastic debate. Thank you, dear colleagues. And I guess this place shows why it's pretty cool to be the president of the happiest country in the world. So thank you, Alex, for having us here. Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.